Hi, this is Ms. Augustine again with the lecture series. We're talking about photorealism right now. Pop art's focus on imagery in mass media inspired artists to look more closely at the photographs. So they began to paint, and it began to be realized as photorealism because they painted so well that it looked like the photo. And the artist would go ahead and take pictures of places and then paint them, and they just look so real. So that's what photorealism was about. A person who was important to that art movement was Chuck Close. Now, he's about 80 years old today, so he's still alive, he's still kicking. I bet he still paints, too. And we'll have some paintings of his in the attachment. But he started doing paintings of portraits that he took of people with a Polaroid camera. Now, if you don't know what a Polaroid camera is, I'd say look it up. My age range and being in my 60s, I used a Polaroid camera, so it's pretty ancient. But the artist, Chuck Close, did this, and he'd blow up the portraits, and they would be on a huge, large canvas. He'd start painting them. But what he used to do, he'd first start putting a grid, sort of like the tic-tac-toe form, over the portraits, and he'd start painting in those squares. Then he would paint smaller squares within the larger ones. And he called this knitting. It's like knit one, purl two, but this was his word that he wanted to call it knitting. And it was like a grid. So he created these large portraits and then knitted them together. A little bit about Chuck Close. He was dyslexic when he was younger, and in school that didn't help him out because the only course that he was good in was art. He did especially poorly in math, and I can understand that because I still to this day cannot do algebra, or I'm not very good at math. But that was his problem. He also had a neuromuscular condition where when he was young he couldn't play in sports. So he was handicapped in these ways. And as he got older, well, I think he was like a teenager, about 14, when he went to a Jackson Pollock exhibit. And he said then that inspired him that he wanted to be an artist. So that was really cool. And to know that at a young age. In college, he earned his undergraduate degree and then went straight to Yale University for their MFA program. That's a Master in Fine Arts. That's about the highest an artist can go in their field for painting or sculpture or architecture, any one of those. What happened with Chuck Close, though, is that it's amazing that he could paint faces because he had something called prosopagnosia, which means face blindness. It means that you may be okay with names of people, but you have trouble recognizing them. I'm the opposite. I can recognize a face before I'll remember someone's name. But he was handicapped with that, and yet he painted these wonderful portraits. Two of his paintings, one that you'll see in the attachment is of Bill Clinton, President Bill Clinton, and another one is of Mercer Cunningham. Unfortunately, I don't have that one, but he is well known for Mercer Cunningham, who was a dancer, choreographer, and President Bill Clinton. I should talk about this. I had an encounter with him, actually in person, at Yale University years ago. This was in the 1990s. He gave a talk there, and it was open for discussion with the artist. And I was surprised to find him in a wheelchair. Normally, when you see an artist with their work, they're standing tall and they're pointing to something and explaining. But it was something that really got to me to see this artist in a wheelchair talking about his work. What he used to do, he'd take a brush, and because, I didn't say why he was paralyzed. He had some sort of a spinal, what do they call it? Spinal, I don't have it in my notes, but it was something that happened with a spinal artery, and it left him, he had some sort of attack, it left him paralyzed. And little by little over the years, with physical therapy, he got a little bit better. But at this time when I saw him, he was in a wheelchair. And he would say how he would paint. He'd tape the paintbrush to his hand and his arm, and he'd paint with his arm like that, not his hand. Amazing person. He's one of the most renowned artists of last century and this century, I'm sure. Okay. And another school of thought, another art school, you could say, is, I said it right, I'll say it, minimalism, which means concise, pure form, looks impersonal, is geometric, is industrial. You have to look at minimalism in a different way than other forms of art, because it is so concise and straight, and because it is geometric, it's like you have to assess it in a different way than, say, impressionistic art or realism. And minimalism, here we go. Minimalism gave birth to post-minimalism in the 60s and 70s, which dramatically changed the way art could be made and accepted. So what was different about post-minimalism? Well, it was about how the materials were used, how objects were used, and how activities were used. So it wasn't just about a two-dimensional painting anymore. It involved so many activities to see how all this would work out and be interpreted as art. So it was a very different type of art, with a lot of different materials and a lot of different objects, and it was more or less the activity of it. That was minimalism. Another area is called process art. Now, process art was not geometric, not industrial, more casual, laid back. Our senses could relate to the work. And we've talked about senses and aesthetics and all that. But this was more casual and more handmade materials. I'd say handmade materials that it had a comfortable way about it. They were not strict and straight and hard edges. But process artists, they were attracted to the unconventional materials used. It became a way that, a way that you could take materials, play with them in a certain way, mix them up. A lot of the times they were, found objects could be used, And in this with process art, which is another movement, there were artists, it's the second time I've said that, there were artists who used this method of process art. One of them is Eva Hesse, Hesse, pronounced Hesse. I looked her up and found out some things about her. And I did because she's an important process artist. She was born in Germany and she died in the United States. Her story is that during Nazi Germany, they had something called Kristallnacht. Kristallnacht was an evening of hatred, of just hatred, just being against the Jews. I should say more than hatred, hate crimes. I mean, they wrecked windows, they destroyed businesses, and this was against the Jews in the 1930s, I believe. And it was a terrible evening of state-sponsored hate crimes. Well, what happened after that? Germans separated the family, and her and her sister went to some sort of a Dutch children's home, which was really sort of like an internment camp, and separated from their parents. So they didn't know what was happening to their parents for a while. But as the story goes, they finally got to leave Germany, so they escaped and came to the United States. And this is where, that's my cat there, one of the cats. Oh. Hey, kitten. Hey, Scout. Oh, well, he turned around. His name's Scout. I'm not doing very well at the lecture part with the cats in the back. But originally from Germany, and her family got out, thank God, alive. Later on, she was diagnosed with heavy-duty depression and cancer, and she inevitably died from cancer. But she was well known as a process artist because she was originally an abstract painter. She experimented with everyday objects, which are called found objects. He's finding something there. He's finding. And some of the materials that were used were rope, string, wire, rubber, and fiberglass. And she used these materials to suggest organic associations and psychological moods, and also a proto-feminist way of looking at the art, which was really sexual innuendos. So she had a lot of nuances that she presented on the art scene that were not seen before. And also she had a lot of whimsy in her work, whimsical. And she was also known for her eccentric sculptures. So she was one of the most important artists in process. In her paintings, because she didn't just do sculptural work, she did paintings as well. She was known for her gestural brushwork. Now, we had line drawings, but there's another type of drawing that you have in your first year college for art school. It's called gesture drawing. So I would look that up on the web as to what it is, but she had that flow, that liveliness in her paintings. And she also had a certain color scheme in her artwork as well. And that's because she studied with Joseph Albers, and he was also a professor at Yale, and he was known for his color theory. So, there's blues in the background. I guess I'm pretty much color theorist with blues and cool colors, but she really put them together. And a lot of artists have different color themes. Mark Rothko was wonderful at color theory. You can mention any artist, how they use their palette, what we've talked about, whether it's high or low, okay, as far as the colors go. Oh, great. Next is about installations that I'd like to talk about. Installations are temporary works. So in other words, you build something, you have it up, people come and see it, they experience it, and before you know it, it's torn down. Okay. There were spaces, the spaces are seen as art for people to enter and to experience. All right. And in our textbook, it talks about Dan Flavin's, Flavin, apostrophe S, his pink out of a, well, I can't read my own handwriting. Pink out of a corner. I have to have it up like this, like I would have in class. And it was dedicated to Jasper Johns. I don't know the thing he had about Jasper Johns, but he had this installation, and it in your book you can see it. I think it's on page 522. It's a fluorescent pink light, and it's in the corner, and it's the type of work that even the wall becomes part of the work because of the shine of the light on it. But very weird stuff, but very cool stuff when you think of it. I had friends in grad school when they did installations, and it's kind of like going through a tunnel in certain points. And maybe, like at Halloween when you have hands reaching out in the darkness. Yeah, things like that. Pretty wild. Huh. Now I'm on to body art and performance. This is also on page 522. Body art is such that, well, okay, we use our bodies as art. And there's a guy by the name of Bruce Nauman, Nauman, which he's mentioned on 523. And if you see this really strange picture, like he's going like that in his eye, he would do weird things with his body and very outrageous things. And that was his body art. And what grew out of this body art was performance. And you can see the performance art on page, well, it's after page 523. I think it's down at the bottom with the two nudes and the person passing through them. All I've got to say is a picture is worth 1,000 words. It's not the type of performance body art that I do, but some people in the art world, like Maria Abranomic, well, she has done things like this nude for years, and she's well known in the performance art field for her body. So, when you think of this, though, when we talked about Dada and Marcel Duchamp, even about Alan Capro and happenings in previous chapters, it all comes down. It's like one world, one art phase influences another. So we had the underpinnings of this in Dada and Marcel Duchamp, and as I said, Caplo and happenings. And it all kind of flows down and then regenerates into something else. And that's what you have with body art and performance. We talked also about another movement, land art. And I don't really want to go over that too much because if you remember the spiral jetty, that's one. And there's a couple other land art things. I think it was dragon. I'm not sure. I'm not sure the name precisely, but I know that we've studied it. And I should know the name, but I can see it in my mind. Sort of like when I could see faces, I can't remember the name. Anyhow, land art is again another movement in art, and we've covered that. We've been there. I'm trying to do this faster because I think the last few times that I tried to teach and to lecture, I've read from my notes, and I read. Oh, there he goes again. He's going to lay down. Scout. I've read from my written notes, and I'm usually a very good writer. And I write better than you can tell than I speak because of my whatever problem I have, dyslexia with the mouth, maybe, I'm not sure. But I have trouble pronouncing words. And tonight I wanted to try something different and just try to talk and have a few notes on the side. So I hope you're getting more out of this and not being talked at as much as like we're kind of having a discussion here. Hopefully you feel more at ease with it. Conceptual art. This is on page 525 of your textbook. Now, this was pretty wild, and this is one of the most important movements. Conceptual art is about ideas, and yet it's about forms that show or they're realistic or realize, say, my writing, forms that show or realize those ideas. So they're not realistic, but they realize the ideas. So it's kind of weird. You've got the ideas, then you've got forms that kind of state what those ideas are. It's an idea of focusing on the concept, not really the artwork. It's the concept of the art. It's what's behind the work. It's a concept, but not the work itself. You had this in data. You had strange things going on in Dadaism, and you also had different things that Marcel Duchamp was doing. It's the idea. One of the ideas they say with the fountain was not only that it was a urinal and he wanted it to be a piece of art, but that he was kind of making a satirical comment about the government at the time. Maybe like being flushed down the toilet. I don't know. But it was sort of a two-way satiric look at things. Conceptualism, so it's not a style, but it's a way of thinking about art. So artists use their art in different ways. And they worked with, this is under conceptualism, but it's one of the things that when you work with concepts, it's also about working with words. Tautology, Tautology. It's a restatement of the same ideas in different terms. So, for instance, in the book it said, in succession of, it's another way of saying one after the other. It's a, I don't know, I shouldn't say it's a weird movement, but it's unusual. But this is what artists do. And one of the artists who took that type of theory to newer heights was Yoko Ono. And you've got to know who Yoko Ono is, even if you're my age, well, or younger, okay, with the Beatles and all, and John Lennon. But she was an artist in her own right, and doing performance venues and doing what is her book, Conceptualism. She started that. It took her 11 years to do. That's amazing. But she would take these little ideas and write these little directions and instructions on how to do things, and she'd keep them all. And then finally she did this book, and it's an artist book. Her artist book was named Grapefruit. And what these artists do, at least she did with her artist book, she had the instructions, which some were realistic, rational, logical, and the others, like think of the sticky pads, whatever, illogical. But you became the performance artist if you followed the instructions. Even if it said, go outside, make a snowball, throw it in the road. I mean, take your sweater, tear it in half. It's something illogical, but that would be part of the art. That would be it. So conceptual art, it's out there. But if you kind of have an open mind and look at it and kind of enjoy it, it's not bad. It's a really neat way of looking at art. That's pretty much for these 7 movements. But there's a reason why I'm highlighting and going through these movements. It's because I want you to have the experience that when you do go to an art museum or you do go to an art gallery, you'll have an idea of all the different types of art that we've gone through, okay? And you'll have a better understanding. I had some words written here, but I'm doing my own thing. You'll have a better understanding, and you'll know more about the art than you think, and you'll probably know more than other people who are in there because you've had this background. I mean, we have just exhausted the semester in art from like the Greeks, the Romans, cave dwellings, all the way up through Impressionism, Realism, abstract expressionism. I mean, we have run the gamut, as they say, with art. And even with conceptualism, minimalism, with the other ones that were mentioned today, photorealism, when you see a piece of artwork like Chuck Close, you'll remember who he is, or even some of the other artists like Jackson Pollock or Kathy Kollwitz, that German person. You'll understand that art appreciation is a lot more, that you come to appreciate the art, but you'll have a grounding, a good foundation in the arts just from having this course. All right. I know I'll send the attachments and some pictures, and please get back to me with the answers. And I hope you're all safe and be well, doing well, okay? All right, thank you.